Hello friends, we are here in Acts chapter 5. And what happens in Acts chapter 5 is a little bit confusing, at least to me. Maybe you got things figured out. But we have to go back a little bit in chapter 4 to get a little context of what's happening here. So the Holy Spirit came upon the church and everybody started basically living in a community where they were just kind of freely giving away their belongings, and there was a man, I think his name was Joseph originally, but they started calling him Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. And Barnabas had some land and he sold the land and he gave all the money to the church. Now when I say church, it's not like a building, this is the group of believers. This is everybody that believes in Jesus. He just gave it to the church and, for everybody to have so that nobody would, be without. It was a good community where there was no poverty. And I'll state really quickly that this is not communism. This is people freely giving and, just because the Holy Spirit might tell them to. People giving because they want to give. So, it's a big difference there. Anyway, so there was a couple named Ananias and Sapphira. Ananias is the man. His name means, my God is gracious. And Sapphira, the name means sapphire. So, Ananias and Sapphira see what Barnabas did. And they probably saw that everybody was like, wow, look at how generous Barnabas is. And they probably wanted praise like that. They wanted high standing in the church. They wanted to be seen as very spiritual. So they went out and they sold their land. But they didn't give it all to the church. But they said that they did. They said, look, we sold all this land, you guys can have all of it. And it wasn't them both together. Ananias, the husband, came and said, he laid it at the apostles' feet and said, this is all the money from the land that I just sold. And Peter says, why did the devil put it in your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? And he's like, you're not lying to men, but to God. Now, Peter explains this, and I'm going to explain it again. And that is that there was no problem with them not giving all their money. Nobody said that they had to give anything. Peter even says here, he's like, wasn't the land yours? And when they sold it, couldn't you have done what you wanted with it? If they would have said, look, this is half of the money from the land that we just sold, I'm sure everybody would have thought, wow, what generous people. I mean, it's far more generous than I am. But they said it was all of it. So the sin was that they lied. They lied to the Holy Spirit. And then, as soon as Peter got finished saying what he said, Ananias just dropped dead. And they had carried him off. And then 3 hours later, his wife came in. And Peter says, did you sell the land for this much money? And she goes, yeah, this much. The money that you see there, that's the money that we got from the land. And then Peter says something very similar. He says, why have you and your husband conspired to lie against the Holy Spirit? The people that just buried your husband, they're coming in, they're going to bury you too. And she said she fell at his feet and she breathed her last. And everybody that saw this happening and heard about it was very scared. And if I'm quite honest, that's pretty scary. Because the truth is, I guess I have the confusing part about this chapter is that we don't know exactly why God dealt so harshly with Ananias and Sapphira. So I have two answers. One is that God really hates hypocrisy. You know, he called out the Pharisees for it constantly. You know, and we have Pharisees in our church. I mean, not real Pharisees, but you know, in the same way that they were hypocrites and they just wanted to do the actions. We have that in Christianity today, and God hates it. He wants real relationships, and he wants people that don't care so much about what other people think of them, but that care about what God thinks of them. So, and it's important to note too that how many people have you ever spoke to that, you know, you ask them whether or not they go to church, and the reason that they'll say that they don't go to church anymore is because they have had some sort of bad experience with, some sort of bad experience with somebody that's in the church, some hypocrite. And it's one of the biggest problems in the church today, is the hypocrisy of the people. And God hated it from the beginning. So it could be that the sin was just such a heinous thing that God struck them dead. The problem is that any way I slice what Ananias and Sapphira did, you know, they lied, you know, they were being hypocritical, they were trying to deceive the church, you know, they wanted the praise of men more than the praise of God. I don't think there's any of these things that I'm not guilty of. You know, God could strike me dead right now and be completely justified in doing so, because Ananias and Sapphira, as far as I can tell, were better people than I am. And, you know, I don't know you, but I don't think you're probably all that different from me. But there's another way of looking at this. Why did God deal so harshly with Ananias and Sapphira? It might have been not the severity of the sin, but I'll explain this, that when the temple was still used before the death of Christ, they would go into what's called the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. Once a year, one person would go into this room, and you know, they would take care of some things and do these rituals. And what they would do when that person would go in there is they'd tie a rope around their foot. And the reason they did that is because if you went into the Holy of Holies, that's where the Holy Spirit was. You know, the presence of the Holy Spirit was in this temple. You know, God was there. And if you sinned, if you thought something sinful or did something sinful there in the Holy of Holies, you would be just struck dead. Now, it's better to be close to God. And this is evidence of it. You know, I was listening to a sermon not too long ago, and they were talking about, you know, this very thing about the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts. And there was this story about Thomas Aquinas came to the Vatican, and the Pope met him and showed him all around, showed him the gold and the silver and just all the wealth of the church and how great everything was. And then the Pope looked at Aquinas and said, "You see, no longer can I say, 'Silver and gold do I not have.'" And then Thomas Aquinas replied, "Yeah, but neither can we say, 'Rise up and walk.'" You know, that's from chapter 3. And You know, I would prefer to live to live in a world where I could say, rise up and walk. Ananias and Sapphira were so close to the Holy Spirit, and I should say that the apostles, you know, in chapter 2, where it had the flames above their head, you know, that was to symbolize the burning bush and the tabernacle. You know, it was the same kind of like fire that doesn't consume, but is still giving off light and warmth. And anyway, I think it might not have been the severity of their sin, but because they were so close to the Holy Spirit is the reason that they fell. I glazed over something that I think should be mentioned, that the Holy Spirit was working so strongly with his apostles that that people were being healed left and right, and it even said that the people would set them on the ground on the street so that Peter's shadow might go over them and heal them. And it said everybody was healed. So such a great example of what, you know, the Holy Spirit can do. So that is Acts chapter 5. All right, bye.